if we think about imposter syndrome as something that happens to you, what are the messages that are happening in the work environment, right? And so my perspective on imposter syndrome and what I have seen in my own experience and the people around me is that when you have a really supportive work culture, right, you're probably not going to have people wanting to sign up for how do I overcome imposter syndrome workshops, right?
Right,
And what I
right.
would encourage company leaders to do is if we were to measure imposter syndrome, that we can use that as the indicator that, oh, there's something happening in this culture. Why is there such a disproportionate number of our workforce who are walking around not knowing how great they are? Are we making sure that we are
Yeah.
telling them and treating them like they're great? And so I think imposter syndrome, if anything, for company leaders is a call to action.
Welcome to the Internal Marketing Podcast, the unique podcast series that flips the marketing conversation from external to internal, exploring all the ways that companies can build a brand and drive growth by engaging and empowering its employees to become powerful ambassadors of the company brand. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimpson, and I'm very happy to bring you this episode where we'll be talking about how to help employees to overcome imposter syndrome. But first, this season's sponsor is Workshop, the number one email tool for internal communications. They created an incredible weekly newsletter for marketing and comms professionals called the Happy Monday Club. If you're looking for more practical resources and powerful perspectives about leveraging the power of internal marketing, then this is absolutely the newsletter for you. Every Monday, the workshop team puts together an inspiring list of articles from some of the world's top workplaces, the latest internal comms templates, and the occasional giveaway or surprise. Join over 30,000 comms and marketing professionals and sign up now at happymondayclub.com. Now, let's jump into this conversation with my featured guest, Jodi-Ann Burey. Jodi-Ann is a writer and speaker, and as a subject matter expert in this area, she'll be sharing about how companies can help their employees to overcome imposter syndrome. Hi, Jodi-Ann. Thank you so much for joining me. Welcome to the Internal Marketing Podcast. It is my pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Kerry-Ann. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, no, I mean, we have to let the listeners in on the fact that, first of all, we're both Jamaican born,
Yep.
right? And you're Jodi-Ann and I'm Kerry-Ann, and we were just laughing in the virtual green room that it's kind of like a Jamaican thing where putting Anns onto first names is a popular thing, you know. So Kerry-Ann, Jodi-Ann, we know of Peter. I know of Peter Ann, Keisha
Mhm.
Ann.
Stacey
So
Ann,
it's
Sasha Ann.
yeah, Stacey Ann. Yeah, that's another one. So we've been having fun. So we know we're Jamaican blooded, that's for sure.
For sure.
But Jodi-Ann, it's such a pleasure to have you here because as I was sharing with you in the green room, there's really no one else that I could think of who could do this particular topic justice. And I'm very excited to dig into it. It's something that I too myself have struggled with, which I share in a lot of other fora. But it's about the whole matter of imposter syndrome, right? And when we talk about, again, internal marketing, one of the objectives of internal marketing is companies use internal marketing to engage employees in the mission, the vision, the purpose of the brand. But one of the objectives that they do that, one of the reasons rather why they do that is to help empower employees to be advocates of the brand externally. And typically advocates online, putting content online on great platforms like LinkedIn, which is where I discovered you personally. And what we found is that putting content online really means that employees have to be putting themselves out there. It's about building their personal brands online. Yes, on LinkedIn, but if they want to do a blog, a vlog, a podcast like what we're on here, or anything at all, it really requires them to use their voices in a very public way. And one of the things that I've found, certainly being the CMO of a company that values things like employee brand advocacy, is that imposter syndrome is a thing. It's something that a number of employees struggle with as perhaps one of the number one reasons why they're not using their voices and contributing to industry conversations that they otherwise would be perfectly capable to do. But Jodi-Ann, I like to start out all my podcast discussions with a nice level set question just to make sure that we're all on the same page. And I'd love for you to define for us and give us a nice working definition of imposter syndrome. What is imposter syndrome and how does it manifest itself?
For sure. Thank you so much for that level setting question. And this is probably my favorite question of any discussion I have about imposter syndrome because the conversation can really stay here for a long time. So I'll just give a quick definition at the top and kind of unravel that a little bit. And so I think the best way to understand imposter syndrome is to think about it as not having an internal sense of your success. And so that means it doesn't matter how many degrees, how many awards. I mean, you can have, best marketer award or Oscars just lining your whole entire place. And you're still like, "Ugh, I'm not good enough, or I didn't do that enough." Or you might say, "Oh, the only reason I got into this degree program is that there must have been a mistake or some type of clerical error," right? People don't understand how difficult this was. This was just luck, right? So it's easy to come up with all of these different excuses to try to resolve the dissonance between the success, the accolades, the achievements, and what you're internally sensing about how successful you are. And so generally, we should understand it as, again, not having an internal sense of your own success. I think a more common understanding is to say that it's an unhealthy level of self doubt. And I want to emphasize the unhealthy part because having doubts is like the equivalent of being a human being. And then whatever you're pursuing professionally, you are going to doubt yourself. I think, doubt is a way that you kind of check your own work, right? And I think that people can find a lot of success and creativity. And that can even be a sign of engagement in your work when there's like, "Ooh, I don't know. I don't know. What do you think?" That type of sensibility. But when it gets to an unhealthy level of self-doubt, I think that's where we start overlapping with this concept of imposter syndrome. Now, the other thing I want to emphasize is I encourage folks to look up the original article about this. It was published in 1978. It is available online. And I think it's about 14 pages. And as far as like academic research papers go, this is pretty easy to read. They're written in ways that are pretty dense, but this is very accessible to understand. And I want to emphasize that because it was originally termed as imposter phenomenon, right? It is something that the researchers who were looking into this were observing as a pattern among quote unquote high achieving women. Now, in the past 50 years, it has morphed into imposter syndrome, even though it is not a disease or an illness. Our common understanding is that it's something that uniquely impacts women. We can talk about that, but generally, people across identities experience what we currently call quote unquote imposter syndrome. And so, for listeners, anytime I normally say imposter syndrome, I'm always putting quotations around that. So, we can assume that I'm doing that for the rest of this discussion. So yeah, that's just a level setting of like what it
Yeah.
is and kind of how it manifests in the ways that we talk about ourselves or the ways that we feel about our success and just a little context of where the term came.
I love that. And I love all of that clarification and the little journey down history in terms of coming from being imposter phenomenon to syndrome. And the fact that you've also clarified that it's not a disease or an illness. How do the symptoms, quote unquote, symptoms, that's what I'm doing too,
Mhm.
symptoms of imposter syndrome, how do they show up in employees who are struggling with this? I mean, again, there are some things that are normal, like doubt, especially if you're
Mhm.
going to do something new, something different. But for those who are actually struggling with imposter syndrome, quote unquote, what are some of the quote unquote symptoms that we
Mhm.
would see coming out in those kinds of employees?
Yeah. So, what's interesting about the medical language around this is that it individualizes the effects or the impacts of imposter syndrome. And so then we look at individual people and we say, you, one person, you are struggling with imposter syndrome. You are suffering from imposter syndrome. You need to be doing something different, better, special to overcome imposter syndrome. And so, what I want to do is change the lens around that to think about imposter syndrome as not necessarily something that you have, right? But it's something that is done to you, right? And so in that context, we can say, to the point of your question, what are the impacts of imposter syndrome? How is imposter syndrome triggering these other effects of how I see myself, how I work, etc.? And so what I would say to that for someone who is facing imposter syndrome or, experiencing imposter syndrome or phenomenon, I will say that it can impact you and that it might diminish your capacity for self advocacy, right? If you don't feel that you're successful, if you feel that whatever you achieved was a mistake or luck, or that someone's going to find you out, right? They're going to figure out that you're not that smart, that you're not that great, that you really don't know what you're doing, then you're probably not going to be the one raising your hand, right? To be advocating for yourself because, my gosh, that would expose your fraudulence, right? I think that also can chip at your sense of self-worth, your feeling of deservedness for promotions, opportunities, visibility. I think that can open you up for being taken advantage of professionally, other people taking your ideas and not saying anything about it. I think that opens you up to be abused professionally, and that can look like being way overworked and way underpaid. And we know that the stressors of those experiences leads to a lower sense of well-being and can also manifest physically as poor health outcomes, right? Hypertension, cardiovascular disease, gastrointestinal distress, right? You can get into unhealthy patterns of what is called like high effort coping. And colloquially, some communities would characterize that as you have to work twice as hard, right, to get half as far, right? So you're really working four times and so that type of overworking has mental and physical health outcomes. And so, again, even though imposter syndrome is not a disease, I think when we think about the kind of the work culture, depending on where you're working, and that creating an environment that triggers imposter syndrome, that the impacts that we face can show up medically, right? In very real ways. It shows up financially, and it shows up in, how we see ourselves and our self-worth, which are all very serious things.
Wow. Yeah, the physical stuff, I guess that's new to me. And it's, you mentioned financial impact. I guess that's coming out of the fact that you're not self-advocating and you're not, if there are promotion opportunities, you're not kind of putting yourself out there and making yourself available. So you're not earning, I suspect, as much as you otherwise could.
And not only that, thinking about self-advocacy, at least in the United States, women disproportionately make way less for the same job than men do. And Latina women make far less. Like it's almost, I think it's at this point like 54 cents, right, in USD compared to a dollar. So that's basically the equivalent of everyone gets their paycheck December 2023 and you don't make that amount until December 20 so that is financial abuse, right? And so
Yes,
when you're
indeed.
in a context where you feel like you're not good enough, you feel like you're not smart enough, you feel like you don't deserve to be where you are, then you're not, you're less able to advocate for the existing injustices that are happening, much less being able to take advantage of opportunities that you deserve, that might come in the future.
Thank you so much for that. I wanted to jump back a little bit, Jodi-Ann, and speak about the whole matter of company culture, which I think you started to allude it to in your previous response. Because I do believe that, and this is just my view, and I'm by no means an expert, so caveat out there. But when we talk about imposter syndrome, I think there is a question of whether or not imposter syndrome comes as a result of how you were raised, perhaps, the home environment that you're in, the family environment, the community, the village, as it were. But there's also a thinking of, well, it's the company culture that could perhaps cause you to experience the quote unquote symptoms of quote unquote imposter syndrome. What's your view? What's your experience with how the company culture impacts? I mean, I don't know if you can speak to perhaps the company culture impact relative to the personal social impact, but
Hmm.
definitely the company culture, since we are speaking primarily to company leaders in this podcast.
Yeah, for sure. I'll share a little story. So for a time, I worked in international development, and I was at a conference in Ethiopia, and it was just a convening of similar organizations from around the world. And I always love going to those meetings. It's like those meetings where everyone has to wear headphones because people are speaking different languages. Loved it. And so this particular meeting was around supporting, women and girls in lower socioeconomic countries around the world. And how can we empower girls to, achieve academically, et cetera. And so I recall there was this one woman from Kenya who got online to give her comments to the panel. And she shared the story that she, was born and raised in Kenya, was educated in the UK, I believe, in England, and she said that never in her entire home life did anyone discourage her or make her feel like she couldn't do math, right? Like that she wasn't smart enough to, understand or be good at math or science because she was a girl. And she was like, I learned that at your schools, right? I learned that in the UK, right? And I had thought of that as you were saying that because we think about the home environment, and certainly the original article that coined imposter phenomenon centered around this village and birth order and, how you were socialized and raised at home and who was the smart one in your family. And if you weren't the smart one in your family, what that did to your own, self understanding of your intelligence. Um, but I think that's such a powerful story to say that there are times when you can have a phenomenal work environment. I mean, a phenomenal home environment, and you step into the world, and the world is what beats you down, you know? And so I think to look at what is happening in the culture of work, what is happening in the culture of your specific organization, because when I hear people say that I have imposter syndrome because I feel like I don't belong, I am not smart enough, my contributions are not good enough because no one pays attention to it, you can connect those same kind of reports of your feelings to the messages that you can get within the work environment. I think it's really difficult to feel that your contributions are worthy if people don't listen to you, or if your coworker says the same thing that you did, and everyone's looking at your coworker for how brilliant their idea is, right? I think it's really hard to feel that you are truly successful when you see that people that you trained are eclipsing you professionally, right? That they are the ones who are getting promoted. They're the ones who are getting the opportunities. It's hard to feel that you are successful if the only time someone is asking me to speak is during Black History Month or Women's History Month. But when it comes to representing my company on behalf of my professional skills, right? They're not knocking on my door. I'm not getting those emails, right?
Right.
And I think it's really difficult to feel successful or to feel, all the accolades and everything when you are disproportionately underpaid. right? Or expected to pick up what people call like office housework, which disproportionately happens with women in a work environment. And so you're like, listen, I have a PhD. So why am I the one planning the social activities for the office?
Sounds familiar.
Right? So I think that it's really important to look at, if we think about imposter syndrome as something that happens to you, what are the messages that are happening in the work environment, right? That disproportionately are being sent to women, people of color, in the US context, or people who, are on the margins of any part of your culture, right? Maybe they have a different religious background. Maybe they come from a different part of your country. I think every social system has their kind of hierarchies, their caste systems. And, I would be surprised if people who, have been marginalized in whatever society that mirrors within the work culture. And so we can see who's getting paid, who's getting visibility, who has the most social capital within an organization, how that stratifies across identity lines. And so my perspective on imposter syndrome and what I have seen in my own experience and in the people around me is that when you have a really supportive work culture, right, you're probably not going to have people wanting to sign up for how do I overcome imposter syndrome workshops, right?
Right,
And what I
right.
would encourage company leaders to do is if we were to measure imposter syndrome, that we can use that as the indicator that, oh, there's something happening in this culture. Why is there such a disproportionate number of our workforce who are walking around not knowing how great they are? Are we making sure that we are
Yeah.
telling them and treating them like they're great? And so I think imposter syndrome, if anything, for company leaders is a call to action.
Yeah, to say the least. And I'm glad you ended your answer that way because it segues into my next question because I feel like again listening to all of the imposter syndrome conversations that are happening, especially online, a platform like LinkedIn, imposter syndrome is seen as well. That's the individual's problem. And it's up to the individual, in this case, employee, to overcome it. And not only are you saying, Jodi-Ann, and I totally agree, that the company culture, irrespective of how someone was perhaps raised or socialized in their home unit or their family unit, a company culture can really have a significant impact on whether or not an employee it struggles with imposter syndrome or not. And it's not just the employee's problem, is what I'm picking up. And so I'd love for you to go into then, Jodi-Ann, for those company leaders who are listening, who perhaps were under the mistaken impression that it's an individual's problem. It really can have a disastrous impact on the company, is my view. And I'd love to get your perspective, Jodi-Ann, on what happens to those companies who don't recognize there's a problem and really don't take the bull by the horns, to
Mhm.
address this issue because there's obviously going to be an impact to them. I'd love to get your perspective on that.
Yeah, so I think we can start with like what are things that matter to companies, right? What matters to capitalism? The things that matter
Yes.
is like how productive you are, right? How innovative you are, how hard you work, right? The ability to retain employees because getting new people to work for you is costly, right? It costs money and it costs time, and it is a ding against innovation and productivity. And I think for all of those reasons that companies, are interested in employee well being, right? And so, from a company's perspective, I'm not saying they care about you as a person as they should, right? But to say that employees who are well, meaning that they're kind of having a good time, right? And they're not sick and they're not calling out. Um, I think wellness also in the sense of financially well, right? Because if I had caregiving responsibilities for children or parents and I had financial resources if there's an emergency or something, I don't need to leave work, right? I probably have some resources to ensure that that person is taken care of without me having to leave the office or, whatever that environment is. So even in the most like cynical way, employers care about employee well-being so they can be more productive and innovative and stay.
Yes.
So in that sense, and because for me, I am not like do the right thing kind of person, right?
Right.
Like
Right.
because
Yeah.
let's just be real about kind of
Mhm.
how corporations and companies operate. So
Right. It's really about the bottom line, right? At the end of
sure,
the day,
and
stakeholders. Yeah.
exactly, exactly. And again, do I think that we should have such an inhumane work culture system or expectation? No. So I'm only
Right.
talking about the scenario where that is all I care about. Productive, innovation, retention, right? Cool.
Hmm.
Now, if you have a whole bunch of people who work for you who don't think they're great, right? Who are really struggling to understand
Hmm.
their sense of success, right? They're really, they feel like they're a fraud. They feel like they're not smart enough. They feel like they don't belong. That doesn't feel like a recipe for innovation, right? That doesn't feel like, I'm going to be
Not at
super
all.
productive. And even in the context where those feelings create overworking, right? Then you're creating burnout. And now you're not having employees who are well. And so for me, it's like if you don't address imposter syndrome, right? Which is to say, I'm not addressing the the policies and norms and processes of how we do business that creates imposter syndrome. I am not going to get the things that I want. And what I think is so phenomenal about platforms like LinkedIn or being able to connect with other professionals in your field or even outside of your field, I think the availability of coaching support, right? That I'm loving every time, I'll just say this every time a Black woman leaves her job, I feel like an angel gets their wing
Wow.
because to be in a situation that you
Hmm.
can realize is no longer serving you and you walk
Hmm.
away, that changes you on a fundamental level, I hope.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that the next opportunity or the next opportunity is something that does serve you.
Yeah.
And so, what I love about professional communities where people can really be honest and vulnerable about, kind of what they're dealing with and what they want out of their careers and, really given that drive to really see what you can do, right? That people will leave, right? There's so many options now, right? People will leave. And so I think companies that don't address these cultural issues that create feelings of imposter syndrome will not be productive, will not be innovative. They will not be able to retain their workforce and they will be, working with people who are just unwell.
It is what it is. That's the bottom line, figuratively and factually. Uh, at the start of the conversation, I highlighted certainly again that one of the objectives of internal marketing is that whole matter of empowering employees to build their personal brands, start using their voices, and that one of the reasons why more employees aren't doing it is because they struggle with imposter syndrome. And then we've gone into, well, how the company culture impacts that and what is the impact to the company itself if they have a culture that brings out imposter syndrome in many ways in too many of its employees. I guess my next question then is, Jodi-Ann, if I'm a company leader, how do I know that I have a problem? How do I know that that's the kind of culture that I have? Is there any kind of internal assessments that I can do or should be doing to know that I have a problem and that it's my culture, my environment, my leadership that's causing this in too many of my employees? How do I do that kind of a health check, I guess, or assessment, internal assessment?
Yeah, I love that. I love that question because I think there are so many things that company leaders can do that can happen even before you talk to a single employee, right? There is no mystery behind what is a good company culture, right? And when I say good,
Right,
I
right.
mean thinking about like the folks who are pushed the furthest to the margins of your culture, of like society overall. How are they faring in your company? Right? Because if it doesn't work for them, it's not working, you know? And so the measures, one, you already have access to. What are your pay scales? Right? Do you have pay transparency policies? Right? Do you
Wow, right.
have any type of transparency or visibility into like the things that matter to employees, which is fairness and compensation? Right? And so you can run a pay equity audit, right? You can see how much your people are being paid, who's getting raises, who's not getting raises, right? And you can do
Yeah,
something
just like
about
that.
that. You can level that out, right? And I've been at companies that have had and that to me was such an expression of like trust and goodwill because I don't think anyone even asked for it. They're like, yeah, we don't think we're paying people what we should be paying them. So we're doing an audit and we're going to bring everyone up over the next 3 years. I think I had a $10,000 bump in that 1 year just because of that leveling, which is huge. Right. And so some research that I did do about pay audits is that because I think maybe people listen to that and they think it's scary and now they have to start paying people all this money is that they really have to I think it's just like a 5% that people are off, right? And so I don't think it's that significant. So I would say look at that.
Right.
I would also look at attrition rates, right? Are you seeing that there's higher attrition on certain departments or among certain kind of communities of people or identities within your company? I would also look at promotion rates to see if there's anything that is disproportionate. Again, that could be across identity. Or let's just say you have two different departments that, have similar functions, right? You have team of engineers A and team of engineers B, right? What happens on team engineers A team, right? Are people not getting promoted, right? Like, so maybe
Yeah.
that's a problem with the leadership, right? If you see that team
Mm.
B has pretty normal rates of promotion, what's happening on team A? And so I think you can look at your own internal data and figure out, are people being treated fairly here, right? Is there something in creating this kind of heat map in your company? Is it happening among particular identity groups, right? Is it happening in particular divisions of, the way that we work? Are people having different experiences in different parts of our company? And what can we do about it? Also, before you even talk to any of your employees, you can do research. I truly believe that we are near saturation of available information online of how people experience work, right? And so,
Yeah.
are you prioritizing learning about it? Because what is happening that is so special here that if everyone is experiencing this all over the world, it's just not happening here. And so I think that can give like an informed approach of how to handle this. And then I think you can specifically ask your employees, you can do employee surveys. And there are a lot of company leaders that are hesitant to learn directly from their employees how they're experiencing that work culture because they think that it'll make them upset, that they'll then start expecting you to do something about it. It'll, impact morale. But why do you think them talking to you about it would do anything different than what they're already feeling? Right? It's kind of like,
Yeah.
having a cavity in your tooth. You kind of know it's there, but it's okay. You can still eat, you're still functioning, it doesn't hurt. But there's one thing I know about dental
Until.
care, right? One thing I know about dental care. It doesn't get better when you
Right.
ignore it.
Right.
It'll
Until it
continue
starts to, yeah.
exactly. It'll continue to decay no matter what you do. And so you have to actually find the cavities. You have to find the decay and address it, right? Because then it'll impact your overall oral care, right? Which also impacts, the overall health of your body. So I always go to health
Yeah.
examples, but
Yeah.
that's like one way to
It's
think about it.
it's a great illustration. And well, Jodi-Ann, we're almost at the end, and I'm at that point in the interview when I ask all my awesome guests about the final takeaway. So, for all of the wonderful things that you would have shared with us in this conversation, and I know there are a lot, so here I am asking you to narrow it down to what's the one key takeaway or nugget that you would love our listeners to come away with having heard everything you would have shared?
The one takeaway I'll say to connect this back into internal marketing is for company leaders, if you want your employees to talk about you online, give them something good to talk about, right? Oh my gosh, I got 6 months maternity leave or paternity leave, or I'm so grateful to work here because of, pay transparency or our remote work, right? I want to show a picture of my beautiful view and say, look at my office today, right? Look at my office assistant and take photos of my dog and how great it is to work here because we have this, right? Or, my company supports unionization or union demand, and they're not engaging in union busting activities as many companies are. Or, I'm so excited that, I'm about 2 levels below this, but I was able to shadow one of our company leaders at this, insert professional opportunity here. And so, what are the tangible things that you are giving your employees something to talk about? I'm not going to talk about how great this company is if I don't feel that, right? And it shouldn't just be a feeling of, loyalty or support or enthusiasm for the company, but something specific that you are doing that is making this person choose you over somewhere else. And
Yes.
a
Yes.
takeaway that I would have for, individuals, for employees, is that your career belongs to you, right? And so if you're thinking about building your online presence or bringing your online brand, that is about you, your network, your skill set, your interests, regardless of where you work. And so that is something that benefits you. And I think, particularly for folks who are marginalized or underrepresented, that can actually give you a little bit of protection, I think, from your own employers when you have a kind of profile that eclipses or is beyond, what they are specifically doing for you as your employer. So, do it for you. It has nothing to do with promoting your company.
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much, Jodi-Ann, for those takeaways. And of course, my final question that I ask all my awesome guests is how can we, the internal marketing tribe, support you?
So I would encourage people to follow me on social media. I'm on Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, of course. I have a TED Talk that you can find. It's called The Myth of Bringing Your Full Authentic Self to Work. You can also go to my website at jodiannbury.com and subscribe. I don't have many things going on, but I say all of that because I do have a book coming out, which is why I'm not really doing a lot right now because I've been writing that. And so if you're in touch with me, then you'll be able to know information about when the cover comes out, when it's going to be published, and how you can get it, and or where you can see me when I take the book on tour.
Sounds exciting. I love that. So, we are going to include links to the TED Talk and to your website in the show notes. So, folks, and we're going to put your LinkedIn URL there as well. So, folks can follow along and stay in touch and hear about all of the awesome things that you have in store. And Jodi-Ann, thank you so very, very much. As I said, I knew you are the only person who could do this topic justice. And I knew I would be right. And I'm glad that it's been so. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I'm sure you've really inspired and informed a lot of folks in this discussion here today. And wishing you all the very best in all that you do. And thanks again very much.
Thank you so much, Kerry-Ann. This was so lovely. And I'm so excited to connect and be with you. And the next time I go back home, I will see if I can come see you in Kingston.
Absolutely. The jerk chicken is on me. Absolutely. Not a
Perfect.
problem. We're looking forward to seeing you. Thank you for tuning in to another episode of the Internal Marketing Podcast. I'm sure you got some great takeaways from this conversation. And if you haven't already subscribed to the Internal Marketing Podcast, then please join the tribe. And don't forget to leave a review and share this podcast with anyone whom you believe will find it valuable as well. I'm your host, Kerry-Ann Stimson, and I look forward to your joining me next time.